Welcome back to Season 3 of the Animal Highlight that's focused on animals and biosecurity and was extracted from the Animal Turn podcast focused on the same theme. This season has been sponsored by Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, A.P.P.L.E, as well as the Biosecurities and Urban Governance Research Collective. I'm joined by co-host Amanda Bunten-Walberg, who, at the time of recording, was a PhD candidate at Queen's University School of Environmental Studies. Her research explored more than human ethics in contagious contexts through the case study of bats and COVID-19. Nandi is particularly interested in how more than human ethics, critical race theory, queer theory, and biopolitical theory might guide humans towards developing more ethical relationships with animals, particularly those who are understood as diseased. In this final episode, Amanda talks about jellyfish and the many ways in which they are thought of as being transgressive. I hope you enjoy listening. Welcome back to the Animal Highlight, Mandy.
Hi, Claudia. I am happy and sad that this is our final one.
I know. It's been delightful having you on the show with me this season. I've learned a lot from you and your kind of style of stitching together stories that are quite, I think, emotive and effective with fascinating details about, I think, the physiology and the lives of animals. So it's been really delightful to listen to you and some of your analytical thoughts with regards to the concepts we've been grappling with this season. So thank you so much for everything. It's been great to have you on the show. And I think, the Animal Highlight's turning into one of my favorite little things. So thank you so much for your time and your energy and your efforts this season.
Oh, and right back at you. I've learned so much and just really enjoyed the whole experience. So thank you.
Awesome. Who are we going to be talking about today?
So for this final highlight, hi Capri. For this final highlight, we're doing jellyfish. So I chose jellyfish because I think it's really important to direct our attention and our empathy towards beings who don't immediately evoke compassion. So beings who maybe aren't necessarily cuddly, who don't possess recognizable faces, beings who are out of human sight or who experience the world in ways that are just radically different from us. But I also want to talk about jellyfish because they're implicated in biosecurity in a number of really fascinating ways. So despite their name, jellyfish aren't actually fish. True jellyfish are part of the phylum Cnidaria, and their closest cousins actually include corals and anemones, not octopuses or squids like a lot of us might assume. Now, when most people think of jellyfish, a drifting being with these gently swaying tentacles protruding from a gelatinous-looking bell comes to mind. And this recognizable image of a jellyfish represents them at the adult Medusa life stage. But jellyfish are transformative beings, and they take on multiple different forms throughout their lives. So, for example, before they mature into adults, they exist as these small, stationary polyps. And I understand why jellyfish in their adult Medusa stage are most famous because they're utterly mesmerizing to watch. Many of them are bioluminescent and they create these hauntingly beautiful underwater light shows. My favorite jellyfish is known as the egg yolk jelly. So, as their name suggests, when they're in their adult form, they actually look like an egg that's been cracked underwater with a yellow core and surrounding of this clear, gelatinous-looking outer shell. They're beautiful to look at. I really recommend folks look them up after listening to this highlight. We know a lot about the anatomy of jellyfish, but there's so little we actually know about their worlds. Most people think that jellyfish don't think or feel pain because they have no brains. However, there are those who really importantly caution against this assumption. So the researcher David Albert, for example, argues that jellyfish do have brains of sorts with nerves that are distributed throughout their whole bodies rather than a centralized system. And they exhibit more complex behaviors beyond what are just simple reflexes. It's also tied to the assumption that they can't think or feel is the assumption that they just merely mindlessly drift through the oceans. But Again, research is calling this assumption into question. The book Jellyfish by Peter Williams discusses helmet jellyfish, for example, who separate themselves into different clusters, and these different clusters have different preferences for vertical height and positioning. And some clusters form as nighttime groups for the purpose of feeding or reproduction. But other clusters have been observed to form briefly and then disband and then reform, and it's not really understood why. But what we are seeing is that jellyfish aren't just passively drifting along, and that they possess more complex behaviors and social worlds than we give them credit for. So, in researching these creatures, I was constantly struck by how little we know about them, and especially about their inner worlds. But I was also struck by how enmeshed their lives are in biosecurity issues. Now, biosecurity is often thought of as an exclusively human practice, but as we've talked about a lot this season, that's not the case. And jellyfish have their own practices for making their lives safe. So, for example, their tentacles have stinging cells to defend against enemies or immobilize prey. And the venom of a jellyfish is really cool and complex in composition. It contains enzymes that break down tissues, it contains neurotoxins, but it also has these pore forming toxins that actually cause cells to leak out their contents. So, in practice, and in the case of humans, this means that a jellyfish sting can have effects ranging from mildly irritating to life threatening. Now, important themes this season included reproduction, so who is allowed to reproduce and who isn't, and also what Lauren Van Patter referred to as desired ecological configurations. And jellyfish disrupt dominantly desired ecological configurations with their unruly embodiments and reproductive capacities. An article by Tamar Stelling, outlines how in 2006, a jellyfish bloom shut down a US Navy nuclear-powered supercarrier. Their bodies were sucked into the water intake that was used to cool the ship's reactor, clogging it up. In 2009, a Japanese fishing boat actually capsized when its crew tried to haul in a net filled with giant Nomura's jellyfish, who were each 2 meters wide and weighed 200 kilograms. Peter Williams discusses how in Chesapeake Bay in North America, jellyfish would bloom in the summer and autumn, reaching densities of 16 jellyfish per cubic meter of water. And these jellyfish densities totally disrupted the fishing and the tourist industries in Chesapeake Bay. Now, unfortunately, again, as we've seen so many times this season, as a result of transgressing what is deemed desirable, jellyfish have been met with some brutal eradication campaigns. And these methods range from sound waves to chemicals to birth control. One of the most horrific methods is what is called a jellyfish elimination robotic swarm. And essentially, what this is a group of aquatic robots with blades that chop up jellyfish. So, these campaigns are brutally violent and devastating to jellyfish. But at the same time, in the face of these threats to life, jellyfish as a species persist and even thrive. Fascinatingly, jellyfish have a really unique relationship to some of the greatest biosecurity threats to much of life on Earth. So the ocean's ecosystems are severely under stress from climate change and overfishing, and it seems that many species of jellyfish are actually well positioned to exploit these stressed conditions. No one knows exactly why, though there's a few possible reasons. One possibility is that many jellyfish can tolerate a lower oxygen content in the water than other creatures. Second, certain jellyfish may actually increase their rate of reproduction with a rise in temperature. Third, jellyfish can go without food for a considerable amount of time. And fourth, they have relatively few predators compared to many other sea creatures. So, all of these traits of many jellyfish may actually allow them to be especially adaptive in what are life-threatening conditions for most sea life. Lastly, jellyfish exhibit a great longevity of life, and one species is even thought to be potentially biologically immortal, which is so cool. Essentially, what happens is this species can reverse their life cycle. So if they meet times of hardship or stress or advanced age, they can actually regress back into polyps and restart this cycle potentially indefinitely.
You're just blowing my mind so hard right now. Like, I'm just like, wait, hang on. There's an animal out there that can choose to say, listen, I'm done for a little bit and regress to being a juvenile and then come back and just possibly bounce between. Do we have any sense of how many times they can do this? Or
researchers think it's potentially indefinite how many times they can do that, although research is ongoing and there are still uncertainties.
what kind of jellyfish is this?
Oh, I haven't written down their name, and it's a long, complicated name. But it's, a specific species that I believe is the only creature in the world that is thought to be potentially biologically immortal.
Well, I can also just kind of see how medical scientists are going to jump on that, because the idea, like humans' kind of fixation with trying to say young, that just blew my mind. Sorry to interrupt you. Go ahead.
No, and actually you sort of preempted my last point, which is just that sadly we've seen this time and time again when animals are associated with cure or longevity, then they get experimented on. And this is definitely the case for jellyfish. So I have a bit of a fraught relationship with even talking about their potential immortality, because a lot of what we know is derived from experimentation. So, jellyfish are these amazing creatures who have marvelously embodied lives of which we know very little. And they're also creatures who are implicated in biosecurity in really complex and interesting ways.
Yeah, thank you. That was awesome. Like, gosh, I mean, so much of what you said there was just really interesting. One, in terms of how the animals live different lives. I think about like tardigrades as well, like the scale at which we think about things as well as where life is happening. Like tardigrades have been shot into space and somehow are like, okay, that's fine. And then they come back and they continue to live. So there's so much life on Earth that exceeds our kind of mammal way of conceiving of time and space, right? Which is remarkable. But then also just what you were saying there about jellyfish exploiting conditions, I think is quite interesting, because sometimes we frame humans as being the species that's particularly egregious, that's particularly bad, and we're pretty selfish species. We're very adaptable. We're very opportunistic, but we're not the only species that's adaptable and opportunistic. And it doesn't make us inherently bad, but it does mean that we've got scope to learn, right? But just really interesting to kind of think about how jellyfish, like what you said there about them being disruptive in these circumstances. Because part of me, where my mind went, as much as they're kind of capitalizing to some extent on what's a really devastating situation in the oceans, is I couldn't help but think about how they disrupt these massive things like tankers, and somehow they stop. They bring everything to a halt. And they're once again a kind of sign of how little control we have, or the illusion of control. And the more we try to kill them, the more they're going to come back, because they do well in those situations. So I'm like, part of me thinks of them as like these little ocean warriors to some extent that slow us down. But of course, they're also devastating to some other species in the ocean as well, which is where the kind of complexity of biosecurity comes in. Yeah, and isn't there a massive, massive diversity of them, right? Do you have any sense? Like, there's a massive array of jellyfish, aren't there?
Yeah, I don't know offhand how many species, but they are very diverse. And then there's also not true jellyfish, but jellies who we refer to, like creatures who we refer to as jellyfish, who are also, if you think about them in addition, they just add to that diversity of shapes and sizes and embodiments.
Yeah, the ocean is a fascinating place. I mean, the more I think about it, I think there's some sort of, we know more about the stars in the galaxy than we do kind of fish in the ocean, which is, I mean, I'm all for learning about stars in the galaxy. I think it's awesome. The more we learn about space, the more we learn about our own planet. Like I'm all for understanding space and like in terms of getting a sense of where we are in the universe. But just the complexity of the oceans and how little we know. And again, coming back to Jonathan Balcom, I know you love Jonathan Balcom, but just like getting a sense of complexity and the diversity in oceans, and there's an entire world going on there that we're just like, we don't know very much about it all. I mean, whether we need to know about it or not to just appreciate its complexity is another thing. Anyway, thank you, Mandy. That was an awesome way to end it. I think you've really taken us a whole range of places this season. We've spoken about birds and mammals and fish and jellies and insects and everything in between. I don't know how you managed to squeeze so much complexity into 10 highlights, but thank you so much for your time and for joining me on the Animal Turn. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye, everyone.
Thank you to Animals in Philosophy, Politics, Law and Ethics, A.P.P.L.E, as well as the Biosecurities and Urban Governance Research Collective for sponsoring Season 5 of the Animal Turn podcast, where this content was extracted from. Thank you also goes to Amanda Bunten-Walberg for being an incredible co-host, and to Rebecca Shen for doing and designing the episode and podcast artwork. This episode was edited by Christiaan Mentz and produced by myself. Just a reminder to please rate and review this podcast wherever you listen. This is The Animal Highlight with me, Claudia Hirtenfelder.